أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا وعملا متقبلا اللهم بارك لنا في هذه المجلس وأجعله سببا للخير والهداية Ameen. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful. O Allah, we ask you for knowledge that benefits, a heart that is humble, and actions that are accepted by you. Guide our words, our intentions, and our reflections so they may bring benefit and unity to all who listen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of You Tell Me, a Canadian Muslim podcast, and welcome back to another season of the Canadian federal elections. Dun dun dun. It's a moment that comes around every few years, and this one I think specifically feels important for us even more so than most as Muslims. I feel like there's a lot at stake. A lot to think about and even more to sort through. So inshallah, let's try to take a step back, slow things down, and try to make sense of it together. We all know voting is a pretty crucial component, a pillar of any functioning democracy. It's one of a few chances we get to directly shape the direction of our community. It's a way to say, I exist, I care, I have a voice. Now, for us Muslims, it's also a responsibility. Our own faith teaches us to stand up, requires us to stand up for justice, to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves, and to make choices that reflect both principles and compassion. Voting is one way we do that. But let's not pretend it's easy. Choosing who to vote for in today's political climate is hard. There's so much noise, so much spin, so many half-truths and emotional arguments, and it's hard to know who's really telling the truth or who's just saying what we want to hear. It can feel overwhelming, paralyzing even. I'm reminded of this game we used to play back when we were kids in Pakistan. Ghufran might know about this as well. It was called Baraf Pani, as in ice water, or rather ice and water. Ice water just means cold water. Anyway, it was basically just a game of tag, but the person who was it would tag you and say baraf or ice. And then you'd have to stand there frozen until a teammate or someone came and tagged you and said pani. And so the game went on. I feel like many of us, myself included, have felt like we have been barafed at some point in time or another during our lives, and particularly when it comes to election seasons. And again, this one, even more than most, seems to be just a bowl of spaghetti. Nothing seems to make sense. And that's why we wanted to do an episode like this one. We wanted to try and help cut through the noise, to try and reframe the debate in ways that feel real and relevant to you, to us, to those who can't spend hours on news channels and read every online article or every social media post or every WhatsApp forward. We're going to, inshallah, try to bring things back to a place of calm, principle, and honest reflection. Just to be clear, we're not here to campaign for anyone. We're not trying to push a party or promote a candidate. What we are trying to do is to help each other think clearly. By the end of the episode, I hope you'll walk away with a better sense of what questions to ask, how to recognize the answers that actually mean something, and maybe even what voices to tune out. You don't need a PhD to vote smart. You just need to care enough to try. Before we do anything else, though, let's meet our guests. First up, we have a very good friend of mine, Ghufran Ahmed. Ghufran is a son, a husband, a father of 3, and quite possibly the most socially magnetic person I know. He's a fellow ADHD brain, a characteristic which, for most of us, myself included, and especially for him, definitely is not a bug. It's a feature. Most notably when it comes to connecting people, building networks, and holding court in every room he's in. Ghufran co-leads a marketing firm that specializes in helping Muslim nonprofits communicate through digital and print media. In his spare time, you might find him indulging his love of woodworking, which I learned very recently is another thing that we share. Inshallah, at some point in time, I'm hoping to have the opportunity to discuss that with him also. Who knows? It might end up taking over this episode, and that's all we talk about. Forget politics. You might also see him doing grassroots work for Palestine or attending Hadith circles with a couple of other magnetic and handsome personalities, like our other guest today, who we'll get to in a moment, and the only other person also on this call, we're not naming any names. He's probably also recommending a podcast you've never heard of, but definitely should check out. I've personally known Ghufran for years now, not just from the aforementioned Hadith circle, but also from a Muslim family camping trip. We both attend a weekend full of tense kids and arguments about who brought the wrong kind of chai. Welcome to the episode of Ghufran.
Thanks for having me, Khurram.
Wonderful. Jazakallah khair. So let's move on to our guest number 2. We've got Shadi Yusuf Darbe. Shadi is the son of 2 Palestinians and someone who brings a very quiet depth to every conversation. He's passionate about Islamic history, world affairs, and understanding the systems and ideologies that shape our lives today. He spends his time learning, contributing to community initiatives, and constantly asking questions that remind the rest of us how important curiosity really is. Shadi's the kind of person who listens more than he speaks, which in today's world, I feel like is the most amazing asset that you can imagine of. Nobody really listens to anybody else. But when he does speak, you'll usually want to sit up and take note. As I said, he's also in the weekly Hadith circle with Ghufran and I. And I've come to really appreciate the balance and sincerity he brings to these kinds of discussions, even if he does insist on using big words to keep us all humble. Now that you've met them, you might be wondering why I chose these 2 specifically. They're not political scientists. They don't work for any party. They're not running for office. And they're definitely not here to tell you who to vote for. But they do bring to the table something I think a lot of us can relate to. They care. They're thoughtful. They wrestle with these questions. And most importantly, they represent the kind of voter many of us actually are. Not activists or analysts, but ordinary people who are trying to do the right thing. And that's actually why I wanted to talk to them, because sometimes hearing someone who's still figuring it out helps you figure it out as well. Welcome to the podcast, both of you. Jazakallah khair for being here. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How's everyone doing?
Alhamdulillah. So I'll just, speaking to your intro, I'll just put this out there that I haven't actually figured out who I'm voting for. And I, being a true ADHDer, I have procrastinated doing the research, and I've been telling everybody else who I think they should vote for, friends and family who ask me, but I haven't done the work myself. So,
you know what's most interesting about that? Because I was thinking, you know what, I should start the episode with some sort of an icebreaker or something along those lines. And I was thinking, like, what should I use? What kind of game should I play or whatever? And I came up with one question that I feel like you just answered for me. Okay, so my question to the 2 of you was going to be, what is the most uncle-like thing you've done in the last 30 days? Okay, and I feel like telling someone how to vote when you don't know how to vote yourself is the perfect answer to that question.
yeah, unfortunately, because I'm very very active in the space of advocacy and just working in the pro-Palestine space, I get asked by a lot of people, especially the elderly, who should I vote for? Just tell me who to vote for. And this is really interesting, I think, because if you think about it, like we have what the West has this idea of, like Athenian democracy being like the gold standard of what a democracy was meant to be, and these ideas, when you see that like more than half the population wasn't even part of that democracy, women and slaves and so on. So I bring that up because even today, democracy isn't perfect. It's a decent system, but it's not perfect. And I think it's important to recognize that as you play in the space.
Right, and I feel like they never really changed it. They came up with the concept of what democracy was going to be, even when it excluded a vast part of the population. And now they haven't really changed it, but they have repackaged it to make it look like it should be appealing to everybody, but it still operates the exact same way, right? So those same people that were in power at that time.
Yeah, it has certain differences here and there. Like in Australia, it functions differently than it does in Canada, as it does in the US, and some worse than others. Like the US, I think is like pretty horrendous because is it really even a democracy at that point in time? But in the Khulafa Rashidin's period, you would see that there were certain people who were considered the elders or the more knowledgeable of the community, and that the rest of the community put their trust in those people to kind of decide for them. And they obviously took people's opinions into consideration and did what we call shura. So I think in that way, like our Canadian democracy does kind of sort of function like that, where people come and ask other people like, hey, who should I vote for? Just tell me. I don't have the time to figure it out. And just, let me know who to vote for. And I try to kind of give them like, not just like, do this or do that, but why do this or do that. Hopefully they can kind of like, teaching a person to fish rather than giving them the fish. But
right. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that why question in just a moment, but I'm going to give Shadi an opportunity to answer my icebreaker as well. What is the most uncle-like thing you've done in the last 30 days?
Well, in the past 30 days would also be related to elections as well. And it was an attempt that I did where I kind of shared publicly how I'm thinking about these elections, and how I would make my selection of the candidate that I would vote for. And I circulated that through multiple WhatsApp groups and social media platforms as well. So that was my attempt to kind of outreach there and try to influence the circles around me. But just to comment there on what Ghufran said, about the current democratic system that we live in, or we participate in, is that because eventually it's not truly the majority of the people who are actually, or let's say not the majority's choice is ruling the country. It's the largest group of voters, but not necessarily the majority. So you end up with something like 35, 40, maybe even 40, 48%, let's say, closer to 50% of the population, maybe at best, being represented in the government or by the government. And their views are the ones that are more dominant afterwards in the decision making and in the governance. So that with time, that I think led to the kind of polarity that we see in the around us in the society. And you don't see it only here in Canada, you see it in the US, you see it in Europe, you see it in Australia, New Zealand, you see it everywhere, that kind of polarity. And it's getting worse day after day. And you see it in the conversations around these elections and around everyday issues, actually. So it's very concerning to see how polarized the community is around us today.
See, yeah, so you guys gave proper grown-up serious answers. My response was going to simply be, I got invited for a guys hangout the other evening at 10:30 and I said it's too late, I have to go to bed. Okay, so I was just gonna give, I had this, very old man uncle-like answer prepared. Meanwhile, you guys totally ruined my script and gave very serious proper answers, which is perfectly okay. You're welcome to do that.
your fault for getting us into election mode.
That's exactly what it is. Okay, so Ghufran, you were talking about people not being able to research or keep up with it, right? It's sort of in that same vein, but we understand that there's a lot of people who actually genuinely feel overwhelmed by politics, by the amount of information that is being bombarded at them, and the amount of spin and all the headlines and all the heartbreak that comes along with it. You and I sort of spoke about how sometimes unplugging from the news may feel like a little bit of form of self-care. You know what I'm talking about? So let me ask first, how do you personally manage that tension between protecting your mental space and staying civically engaged?
So I used to be a constant news cycle consumer. It would be continuously while I'm driving. I'd be listening to CBC News and another radio station from Buffalo that we used to get at one point in time. And that was my entire drive every day. As much as I could consume, I would keep consuming. And when COVID happened, I wasn't going out anywhere. I wasn't driving. So I just stopped listening to the news. And I found that I was actually feeling a lot better. And I found that I didn't actually feel like I needed to know exactly what was going on every second of the day. And in doing so, I actually started listening to audiobooks and I started listening to podcasts instead. And I found that it helped me kind of maintain my sanity. I chose to disconnect myself from the news, and it's kind of embarrassing to admit this, but I had seen a Lady Gaga, I think, headline at one point in time, which was talking about how she does not consume the news at all, and she thinks that makes her a more sane and well-informed person in some twisted way. And so I kind of used that as my inspiration. Totally not a Lady Gaga fan, but just putting that out there.
So, Shadi, if I were to come to you and say, I can't deal with politics anymore, it's too annoying, everybody's a liar, it's difficult to pay attention and keep up, I'm done, I'm not going to vote, what would you say to them? What would you say to me if I were to come and say that to you?
Yeah, so absolutely. I would start by saying we are commanded in our religion to act and not just, take a break from the community and distance ourselves from our public affairs. Now, we can balance that against, seclusion, and because seclusion is also a good thing to have sometimes, but you need to balance between the two. You cannot completely distance yourself from community, but also you might need for your kind of mental health, let's say, and your spiritual health as well, to distance yourself sometimes, but the general gist of our religion is actually action. So I cannot just believe in Allah Azza wa Jal and believe in the Prophet and the 5 pillars of Iman and just keep it there. We have the hadith of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, where he said that if the hour comes upon you and you have like a plant, seedling in your hand, and you can plant it, do so, right? So even at the last moment, we are commanded to act and not just despair, right? So our religion is asking us to act, or is demanding us actually to act. And here in Canada, we are blessed. We are blessed to have a democratic system with its flaws, but it's still there. You can get your voice. You can get your voice through. And it's only at this part of the democratic cycle where you can actually make your voice through your vote make a difference, right? So yes, there are very confusing narratives out there. There are many spins and many half-truths out there, as you said at the beginning. It's our duty to try to navigate through this, make the best out of it, try to understand it to the best of our knowledge, and make a decision, and then just go out and vote. We owe it to ourselves as individuals. We owe it to our families, because there is a responsibility towards them also. And we owe it also to our brothers and sisters abroad as well, like in Gaza, like in our Uyghur brothers and sisters in Kashmir and Sudan, everywhere, not just here. So we have this, let's say, progression of, we are demanded to act. We have to make the best out of the situation around us and try to understand it to the best of our knowledge, and then make that duty that we have towards ourselves and towards the Ummah as well.
Jazakumullah khair. No, thank you so much. I honestly, so one thing that I feel like I captured while you were talking is the idea of Islam being a religion of action. So yes, seclusion and trying to separate yourself from the noise is healthy, and that's okay. We actually have examples from the Sunnah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam of seclusion from time to time. We have it built into our practices. The concept of i'tikaf is essentially a mechanism allowing us to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately a religion of action. But action not just for the sake of productivity. What the modern definition of productivity might be is just to do, but to be productive with a sense of purpose, with a specific set of guiding principles on why we're being productive, understanding why we're doing what we're doing. The only other thing I want to add is for anyone that may feel that apathy or that feeling of frozen, the baraf concept that I was talking about earlier, is once you understand that this is important, that this is critical and this is worthwhile. Shadi explained it beautifully on why it's important. Once you understand that, then there's a lot of resources out there, right? You don't have to rely on YouTube and TikTok. Those are probably not the good resources that you want to use, but there are excellent resources, not just Muslim ones. What is that, 338something.com? I have that link somewhere. I can't remember the exact website right now, but 338 Canada or 38politics.com or something along those lines. I can't remember. I have the link. I'll put it in the description. But there's tools like that out there. If you're looking for Muslim tools, there's the whole muslimvotes.ca or Canadian Muslim Vote, right? Like the Justice for All is doing an excellent job of providing good information. So there's a lot of good tools out there that people can access and get guidance from, as long as that there's an understanding that getting that help is important and actually voting is important. It is a crucial piece, and you don't necessarily want to eliminate that. In Canada, every time we cast a vote, we're casting 3 votes, right? On the platform, the party leader, as well as our local candidate. And now what's interesting, I actually very recently learned this, is that every party does release a pretty big document outlining what they stand for, their political platform. The problem is, however, it is well over 100-page document, and most people, myself included, don't read those 100 pages. And we end up relying on summaries, debates.
Snippets that come out of the media.
Exactly. A lot of the media. There's this tool I found called Vote Compass, which I thought was a really good place to get those summaries. But those are reliable official summaries. But when you listen to, let's be honest, a group like us on a podcast, and if we're providing you that summary, usually there's some bias or some skewed perspective that is coming out of that. And there's some agenda that a lot of non-official sources end up pushing on you, right? Here's what I'd love your guys' thoughts on. Where do you individually start? Do you guys typically end up starting with the leader, the party, or the person on the ballot?
So I typically look at the actual candidate. The reason being that they are, in theory, supposed to be a representative of our opinions as constituents. And so I think they matter. If you're not able to connect with your candidate, and if your candidate doesn't represent your views, then really all of those viewpoints of Canadians on the ground come up to the party level and then form policy. So I think it's actually more important to look at individual candidates as opposed to parties. What that ends up doing for me personally is that it doesn't restrict me to voting just conservative or liberal or NDP as an example, because those are the major parties. I'm open to somebody who isn't part of the big parties but is a good representative, or can be a good representative of the voice of Canadians, or what I perceive to be the voice of the Canadians in my community.
Interesting. Shadi, you've mentioned, in our previous conversations about developing a sort of a logic model. Walk us through what that means for you. Do you end up paying attention to the party platform? Do you trust them?
So I'll just give a bit of preface there that there is what you do in normal times and there is what you do in exceptional times. And what I would do in normal times is just look at the candidates, exactly what like Ghufran said. And by the way, by the end we will come to the same. Probably Ghufran and I were coming up with the same conclusion, but maybe the thought process is somewhat different, you know. So in normal times, I would just look at the candidate. Okay, I don't care if they are, um, um, you know, from a larger party or a smaller party, whether they have the highest chances of winning or not. I normally vote my conscience. You know, I vote for the candidate that represents what I stand for, right? Now, today, I believe we are in a pivotal moment in history, in modern history, not just within Canada, but at the larger scale as well, globally. Um, because of, you know, our friends down south, you know, like how they are behaving right now in the US, and what we see in other places in the world as well. I think in an exceptional time like this, maybe it's a good idea to start from the end and go backwards to the beginning. So start with what would be the ideal situation for me in terms of what kind of government is governing Canada. Is that like a majority liberal government? Is that like a majority conservative government? Is it a minority of one of them with another party? And so on. So for this election, my primary two goals or my primary two drivers were Palestine and Islamophobia.
Right.
And if I start from there, I know that an NDP majority government is the best thing I can ever dream of, you know, for these two cases. However, we know that that's not realistic. You know, like as you said, if you look at the resources available out there, statistically, it's not possible for the NDP to form a government, right? So that becomes like the best option for us, or the best choice for me, is not a probable outcome. Okay, so I need to start looking at probable outcomes. And when I look at probable outcomes, I believe the most probable outcome today is a liberal majority government or a liberal minority government. You know, more likely a majority, but that is still a possibility as well. So in a situation like this, I think a minority government is better for the two objectives that I've put there. But that's not something I can control. Like I don't have control over the 343
Seats.
ridings in Canada. I have control in the riding that I'm within. And in that case, I need to aim for not a minority government. I need to aim for a majority government. Like my actions should contribute to a majority government. So that is the logic. And when people say like, why is one better than the other for these topics? That's a conversation we can get into, but I don't want to take up the whole time for that.
Shadi, wouldn't you say that the candidate also played a role in your decision particularly?
Absolutely. So once I take that logic, let's say if I'm living in the riding I'm living in, I'm blessed that I have a candidate who is more on the pro-Palestinian side and is more on, like, you know, he has stood up for minorities in the country, generally speaking, not just Muslims, but particularly also for Muslims. So he aligns with these two goals as a candidate. And he also aligns with that, or choosing him would align with that grander scheme of things where you would want, let's say, a liberal majority or a liberal minority government, you know.
The reason why I asked that question is because in like the writing that I particularly organize in, it's kind of the opposite, where like Shadi said, it would be nice to aim for a liberal majority, but the candidate in that writing has been so horrendous on the issue of Palestine that really, like, none of the pro-Palestinian community would like to see that candidate elected or even be anywhere near government.
So that Quran becomes the second tier of the logic. Like the first tier of the logic is more on, okay, what does the government good for Palestine and good for Muslims in Canada look like? The second tier is, how would you deal with those candidates? And The logic is as follows. If an NDP candidate has the highest chances of winning, I'm going NDP regardless. I'm going NDP because that makes sense, right? So I'll go for that anyways. Now, if he doesn't have a chance or she doesn't have a chance of winning, then I'm going for the next best thing, which is, okay, how does the Liberal candidate in my riding look like? Okay. And if that Liberal candidate has signed the Vote Palestine pledge, for example, and has shown a good track record on Palestine, on protecting minorities in Canada, then that he would check or she would check the box for being a suitable candidate for me to vote for. Now, if that candidate has not stood up or didn't stand up for Palestine, 18 months of genocide did not move them. 18 months of ethnic cleansing did not get them to make even a proper statement on the issue, at least, then that candidate doesn't deserve my vote, and I will just vote on principle regardless. Regardless who is winning, my vote goes back to an NDP candidate or a Green candidate, and that's it. I'm not voting Conservative.
That's a given for you. That's pretty obvious, right? And I think you've done a pretty good job of explaining the concept of strategic voting, right? Like voting for a party that you may not fully support in order to prevent a party you want to make sure definitely does not win. And I understand it. We're in a situation where that might be the case. And your point about these being exceptional times that require exceptional measures may override my entire concerns. However, when it comes to strategic voting, there are a few concerns that I do have. When it comes to the loss of the voter voice and maybe messaging, right? I feel like strategic voting can suppress the real signals of party popularity. So, for example, again, like you said, if many NDP supporters vote Liberal out of fear that a Conservative candidate might win, and so we want to make sure they don't win, so we won't do NDP, we'll do Liberal, right? That's exactly what the scenario that you presented. The Liberal Party may never get the message that those voters did prefer NDP, or at the very least preferred NDP policies, right? It'll reduce the pressure on those bigger parties to adopt better policies for smaller ones, right? The other thing is it almost reinforces a two-party system. One of the strengths that Canada has over the US particularly is that we're not a mandatorily two-party system. And when we do strategic voting and we don't vote for NDP, even though that's who we believe is the right party, but we'll vote Liberal to block the Conservative, it does end up discouraging support for those smaller parties, the NDP, the Green, the Bloc. And over time, it just ensures that those two parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, dominate, and then limiting the choices, the innovation, and those smaller parties end up struggling to grow, even if public support is quietly increasing, right? It feels a little short-sighted to me. When we do strategic voting, at the moment, it may be the right move for this election, but over a course of lifetimes and a Canada that we're possibly want to leave for our children, it may not be the best case scenario.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the challenge that I kind of find myself in is it almost feels like every election cycle becomes there's an existential threat, and so I don't want to mention any parties, but a certain party will threaten us with another party and say, hey, if you don't vote for us, then they're gonna win and they're the boogeyman. And that rhetoric and that thing keeps us in a state of fear and forces us to comply to their wishes, and in doing so further strengthens that two-party structure which our neighbors in the South have.
I remember there was a campaign, it was called Anything But Conservative, ABC, which was of just a thinly veiled liberal campaign.
Right. And similar to that, there's a campaign this election cycle called VoteSmartPalestine.ca, which was very intentionally made to sound like VotePalestine.ca, and essentially Vote Smart Palestine is entirely like a liberal concoction.
Yeah, and that's why in the model that I presented, it's not truly just a strategic vote like your typical strategic vote. It's more of a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know, so it's not voting for liberals flat out. It's not like that. It's you're voting for your first choice is actually an NDP. So in a riding where an NDP has a chances of winning, even if they are neck to neck with the liberals or close to the liberals, I would still vote NDP. And if I know that the liberal is a Zionist, even if they are winning, and their win will block the conservatives from winning, if they are a Zionist or an Islamophobe, I will vote against them. I will vote NDP, I'll vote Green.
And the reason for that is to show the Liberal Party that we will not accept a Zionist candidate.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is one way of showing the liberals that where they are not welcome and where their candidate was not a good choice for us. The other thing is vote Palestine, and with vote Palestine, what the campaign is trying to do is to gather pledges from the public that show that we will not vote for anyone unless they take the vote Palestine pledge. Okay. And those MPs or those candidates, they actually receive emails of your pledges. Like when you make a pledge, they get a copy of that. And that gives them a count of how many people are actually not aligned or aligned with their position on Palestine. So there are several mechanisms out there, and I think in certain ridings around the GTA and elsewhere in Canada, I think we have managed to make Palestine or Gaza in particular an elections issue. Like when it comes up every few days, and like in a news article, in a newspaper article, or comes up with a statement of a certain party leader who's not happy with certain statements that are made by certain candidates on Palestine and stuff like that, that shows that those actions and these campaigns are actually ruffling some feathers. That's one. And they are making Gaza an elections issue indeed.
Perfect. So, Ghufran, let me ask you, what I liked about how we're talking about it is I feel like most of the conversation so far has been very specific to the local candidates, which is the logical way of doing it. However, whether we like it or not, federal politics very often do end up revolving around personalities. The prime minister does hold a ton of power, and if their values don't always line up with the party, that's understandably a problem.
Right.
What if there was a leader that you liked, but they belonged to a party that you don't trust? What would you do in that situation?
I think like I put a lot of weight into the individual candidates at the ground level. We've seen many examples in our recent past, even just as recent as Justin Trudeau coming into power, where one of the promises that they made in their election campaign was to do electoral reform, which was basically to slightly tweak the system of democracy that we currently have. Instead of so the way the current system works, which is kind of problematic, is that I'm always voting for the person who I A, like, and B, think is likely to win, right? So if I like somebody but I think they might not win, I'm probably not going to vote for them, right? So that was one of the promises that Justin Trudeau had made, that he would revisit the electoral system, and as soon as he was in power, because the reason being is if you change the electoral system, then the major parties actually lose a lot from that, because they now have to relinquish power to the smaller parties, and so of course they threw that out as soon as they got.
Oh, and that makes sense. The only thing I want to comment on is your comment about if you like a candidate and you know for sure that they're not going to win, then they're probably not going to get your vote. Maybe not for this election, because it feels like a kind of a life and death situation. It's a pretty dire situation. I don't know if there's a realistic possibility of there ever being an election that doesn't come with a life or death scenario. However, for our own long-term benefit, it must, at least in my view, that we have to have like some discussions internally within the Muslim community where we can get us to a point where we can vote for people who we think are the right people, regardless of whether we think they'll win or not. Right? Until we can get to that point, nothing will change. We'll again end up in these life or death situations, and nothing's going to end up changing. I would love to be able to say that we should be doing that right now.
I think I was listening to a podcast on the Thinking Muslim recently with the Australian Senator Fatima Payman, and she was talking about how important it is to actually strengthen the independents and the smaller parties to preserve a healthy and thriving democracy. And it's when you kind of like take away power from those smaller parties and the independents is when you start to see bigger parties get more comfortable, consolidate power between themselves, and then you see what happens, what we're currently witnessing down south.
What we're currently facing, right? And if we were to bring it back to Muslims, so Shadi sort of touched on that we carry a very complex set of priorities, right? For some, Islamophobia being the front and center. For others, it's foreign policy, Gaza, Palestine, Kashmir. But then for some, it might be more common issues like affordability or housing or taxes or even immigration. Like I know in the GTA right now, immigration has been a pretty big topic just as a voter, not necessarily as a Muslim voter, but as a voter. Do you guys ever feel like you're being forced to choose one identity over another, whether it be Muslim parent, worker, citizen, etc.?
There is no doubt that all these issues are important. Like, we cannot undermine the economy. We cannot undermine safety. We cannot undermine affordability. A lot of these issues are real issues, but the magnitude of the issues is probably in certain cases blown out of proportions. That's one. Second point is probably also some of these issues are described, or the reasons behind these issues are described in an ideological way to support a certain party versus another. And these descriptions may not be very accurate of why these problems happened. So they might neglect certain facts behind these things. And by doing so, if you have wrong diagnosis for a disease, you cannot really prescribe the correct medicine for it, right? So there is a lot of this mistaken diagnosis of what's going on, and therefore the solutions for these are ideologically driven and also not truthfully presented to the community, and I believe they will not be solving the issues, and I would also caution the people, the public around us, of certain narratives. Like, for example, the immigration narrative is a very dangerous narrative because 20 years ago it was the Muslims. Today it's a different group that is being targeted. Tomorrow it's going to be another group. We don't know when the roster will go around again and get to us. We know that during COVID there was a huge demand for manpower. There was a demand for having people come in. Now, you cannot build houses at the same pace as you're getting people. And you have probably understood by now that I'm not a liberal supporter, right? But just to be fair to them, even in other countries where the conservatives were ruling, like in England, for example, or in certain European countries, if you look at the same metrics that people complain about here, they're standing at the same kind of numbers, or they are having the same kinds of trends, So we are not living a unique situation here. So that's just, to put things in perspective and not to fall for the traps of parties' propaganda on those issues. Now, when it comes to prioritization, I hear this from a lot of people, the economy, security, safety. Yes, that's important. How important is that if I'm not alive, for example? So we have the maqasid, right, in Islam. So we have these objectives, right, higher objectives of the religion. And they start with protection of the nafs, protection of the person, right? And then you can go into protection of, the deen, and protection of your will, let's say, and so on. So these rank actually that way, like the highest, most important thing is hifdun nafs. So if you know that Islamophobia is on the rise and there is a real threat to people's lives, that becomes your first priority. When you see that a genocide is ongoing in Palestine and 50,000 plus people have been killed already, then you realize that, okay, that's a priority for me. I need to stop that bloodshed, okay? And then I would care about other issues. If I can do both, that's perfect. But if I need to prioritize, I'll prioritize the nafs, the deen, and then the wealth.
Right, and I don't disagree with that. Before I say, Ghufran, I know you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that I think our Islamic identity and our kind of ethos plays a part into kind of defining what we prioritize, and also how we interact with these issues. Like, for example, the issue of immigrants. I think it's really ironic that many of us came as immigrants not too long ago, or if we didn't, our parents did, or if our parents did, our grandparents did. And would we be okay with talking about our grandparents or our great grandparents the same way as we today talk about the immigrants of today? And I think also they've been wronged, because they've been brought here with the promise of having a good life, and they did not find that when they came here. The government did not provide. A lot of them live in really awful conditions, have mortgaged their homes and their farms back home before coming here, with false promises from immigration agents and other shady characters. And so I think the Islamic ethos kind of plays into this. First of all, that's a wrong that's been done to them, and so that's one part of it. But the other part of it is, hey, these people are immigrants, and how did the Prophet ﷺ expect us to deal with immigrants? How were the Muhajirun dealt with when they came to Medina and they found the Ansar? There's the classic, there's a famous story of the Sahabi who tells Abdurrahman ibn Auf, here's all of my wealth, everything that I own, half of it is yours, because you've now been partnered with me. I'm your brother, and I'm supposed to take care of you. And then Abdurrahman ibn Auf, as the story goes, politely declines, and he says, "Show me where the marketplace is." And a few weeks later, the guy's dressed in amazing clothes, and he's getting married, because he was a natural business person. But the point being, we actually owe it to immigrant communities, and that's not just Muslims but also non-Muslims, to take care of them. Our mosques have become so sorry, I'm moving a little off the topic, but our mosques have become so grand and such beautiful places that we have so much to lose with these mosques. The carpet is so nice that we can't mess it up. Kids can't run around with their food. There are a lot of homeless people who come to the mosque, and I've seen them at Isha time, and they have their bags and all of that stuff, and they've finished their Isha, and they're trying to extend the time that they stay in the mosque as much as possible. And the poor mosque worker has to kind of force them to leave, or in one way or another. And weren't the mosques supposed to be places where the homeless could come and stay?
Yeah, sanctuary.
Right?
Yeah,
wasn't that how it was in the time of the Prophet?
Right. I want to. Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I don't worry. I'm not worried about it being a tangent. I think it's valuable points. I do want to come back to a little bit about the exceptional circumstances. Right? In principle, I have no disagreement. Obviously, these are exceptional circumstances, and the protection of the nafs should be a number one point according to our deen. However, if I am a 24-year-old who wants to get married and I want to buy a small townhome or a small apartment so I can live with my wife, and the townhome costs $750,000 or $1 million these days, right? And I can't buy, even though I have a good job, and I still can't buy a little place for my family to live, regardless of the Sharia points of mortgage being halal or haram. I can't even do that, with that perspective. Or if there's a single mom with a couple of kids who earns, $40,000-$50,000 a year and she can't pay rent, or a small business owner who's worried about taxes or the cost of goods, telling those people in that situation to ignore some of their personal issues in that manner and vote based on that exceptional circumstances criteria on just the foreign policy of a country or of a candidate, I don't know if that's going to be acceptable for people in very specific situations. And if we choose to ignore those perspectives and not provide guidance or support for those specific people as well, I think we're making a mistake, and we're going to end up in that same situation where we think we made a lot of sense. Oh, everything was logical. We think, look, it was so black and white. How come we still didn't vote together as a bloc? Like, why is it that people still vote weird on their own agendas? I think it'll still end up being a mistake on our part. How do you propose we potentially address that disconnect?
I understand, individual needs, but our religion is not a religion of individuals only. It's a collective religion, right? So there are certain duties that we have towards our brethren, here and abroad. So whether it's that homeless person here in Canada who's trying to stay at the mosque a bit longer, or someone living across the globe, we have that duty towards them. Now, a lot of the promises that people hear from candidates are actually empty promises. We have been fed lots of lies over the past 3 years. So I would first urge the person to think thoroughly and try to navigate through these promises and see, would it really make sense? Like, is this candidate or is this party platform truly gonna solve this problem and make housing affordable for me, or is it just propaganda? That's one thing, right? Just to kind of address that individual piece. But at the same time, when we look at the collective piece, we know that there is a party today that is saying publicly that they will be cutting UNRWA funding. And we know that this very specific party, in their last 3 years of governance, I don't know before that, I didn't see the numbers before that, but the last 3 years they governed, they also paid $0 to UNRWA. Now, for those who don't know what UNRWA is a United Nations organization. It's the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, and it's specific for Palestinian refugees. Both my parents studied at UNRWA schools. Both my parents received medical care by UNRWA health facilities. Both my parents received nutritional supplements. So both my parents were Palestinian refugees, right? So my father was born in 1952 at a camp that they have been in for like 4 years at that point. So they were forcibly expelled from their village in Palestine in 1948. A massacre happened in that village, and they lived in a refugee camp between 1948 and 1967. Okay, and then in 1967 they were expelled again to Jordan. On my mother's side, the story is a bit different, but this is the same kind of journey there, where they went to a refugee camp also, but in Jordan right away. So UNRWA was kind of managing these refugee camps in terms of education, healthcare, providing financial aid and nutritional aid as well. My father retired as a bank manager, and he thanks Allah Azza wa Jal first, but also he thanks UNRWA second, because it gave him those opportunities, right? The people of Gaza, for example, a big percentage of the people in Gaza are actually refugees from lands that were occupied in 1948. Lots of people in Gaza were actually on aid from UNRWA and other organizations. So lots of the schools that we hear about being bombed in Gaza, lots of the medical facilities, lots of the food facilities that are being also demolished and bombed by the Israeli forces are actually owned and operated by UNRWA, by the United Nations, basically. Yes. And Canada is one of the generous donors for UNRWA. So this is one example, this is one example where our voting will directly impact our brothers and sisters on the ground and us, right? So yes, I may still be renting a house rather than buying a house, but still have a house. My kids can go to public
There
schools,
lies the difference.
like, yes. So I might get some inconveniences, but someone else might lose their livelihood, or the ability to live a life with even the minimum, like the basics of living, or no, so this is what I would tell people about. There are so many examples, like arms embargo is another example, but just to keep it short, this is a good example of how me trying to seek conveniences in life can actually cause someone else their livelihood in Palestine.
And the other thing that I will also add is the Prophet ﷺ said, when you want to see, when you think things are bad for you, look at those who have it worse than you, right? And so, like the vast majority of the population of the world, Muslims and non-Muslim, actually do not own homes. And it's this idea of like owning a home, or even more nefarious, the idea of a home being an investment, I think has been fed to us in the last like 40 years. And because of that, you see private corporations buying up rental homes and renting them out to people, and having monopolies in rental markets and so on and so forth. And I think the Canadian government to some degree has done a decent job of kind of protecting us from those things through rent control and things like that. But I think a lot more can be done. And I think this idea of like a home or a residential property being an investment needs to be put at the grave.
That needs to be gone out of the window. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. Okay, Jazakallah khair. I think that was pretty amazing. Let me do a final roundtable. So, if Ghufran, let me start with you, just to wrap things up. If you had one final message to offer listeners, what would that be?
Right. So I think one of the things that I would say is that look at the picture more broadly than you see. Don't think of yourself alone, but think of others as well. And I think if you think of others today, somebody else will think of you when you're at your low state. And I think compassion and empathy are things that are sadly very scarce in the society we live in, and are becoming even more so with the very polarizing rhetoric online and from our parties and our political representatives. So I think that's important. The other thing that I would say is, I think you'll post links for this, but votepalestine.ca is one great outlet that you can look to for direction on who to vote for. The stance that Vote Palestine took is that anybody who takes the 5-point Palestine pledge, which includes an arms embargo, which includes funding UNRWA and 3 other points, they would be listed on their site. Another outlet that I think is also valuable is called muslimsvote.ca, Muslims with an S at the end. They've taken the same approach of like who supports Palestine, but also in addition to that, who's more likely to win. And if the candidate who's likely to win is really horrendous on the issue of Palestine, they've excluded those candidates. And there's always somebody in our circles who knows a bit more about what's happening. Reach out to somebody like that and ask them for advice on how to vote. I think at the end of the day is, no matter how you vote, the important thing is to vote, because I think too few of us actually vote. So I think that's an important thing, and encourage your friends, your family, your neighbors to go out and vote. I think that's something that every single one of us can do to make a difference. You don't have to tell them who to vote for. If they ask you, then that's a different story. But the important thing is to vote.
Jazakumullahu khair. Brother Shadi, your turn.
So my message would be like, out of the values that we hold dear to us, I think 2 values need to be activated today. First value is action, and I think the second value is unity, because at times of elections, our voices hold more weight than at normal times. And if we come united, we will get our voices across in a more powerful and impactful way. So the more we unite behind these organizations and behind these endorsements that are out there, I believe the more we will be impactful in the outcomes of these elections. Just to give a bit of depth there on those platforms, Vote Palestine is one, but then with Muslims Vote, they have helped us remove that ambiguity of, okay, two candidates have a good stance on Palestine. Which one shall I vote for? They did that work for us. But the important piece there is that this initiative is backed by more than 100 Muslim or Islamic organizations in Canada. So when we look at NCCM, ISNA, ICNA, like it's a very long list of organizations that have endorsed this initiative. They are not necessarily endorsing the candidates, but they are saying yes to unity, and this Muslims Vote platform is the highest consensus we got.
And just to put this out there, it's not perfect by any means, but it doesn't need to be perfect. And I think that's that, like if we strive for perfection, we're never going to get anything done. And a lot of people will criticize and say, hey, this specific writing, the candidate did not sign the Vote Palestine pledge, and the candidate who signed the Vote Palestine pledge was not endorsed, but the one who didn't sign it was endorsed. And I think that's, that these differences are okay, and I think it just goes to show that we are, a mosaic of differences that can work together.
Absolutely. So I would say if like they probably got it 9 out of 10 correct, so they get like an A or an A plus, maybe even close to that. So they didn't necessarily get it right each and every riding. And there's definitely space for individual choices. We cannot take that away from people, but the more we align with these endorsements, I think the stronger the message is, and we should cut them a slack because they really did a good job. They didn't get a perfect job, but I think a good enough job of making these.
I think the important thing is that they stood up and took the initiative where nobody else was doing that. And I think that's important. Like, when somebody takes the initiative, we need to be able to support them, even if we disagree with them.
Yeah, I think it's a really good sign for our community as well, because for a community that is synonymous with being unorganized, the fact that we've been able to put this many organizations together that seem to be working with each other and not against each other and actually collaborating and trying to have a long-lasting impact and be able to bring all these masajid and all these groups on board to support them, it is a great sign for our future. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it is more than just a good start at this point in time. I think we've gone a good part of the journey. Jazakallah khair to the both of you. Thank you so much. That was an absolutely amazing conversation. And I think your insights were very valuable, but they were also very real. Like, they didn't feel like very imposing, I'm the expert, listen to me kind of points. They alhamdulillah, they had a very genuine feeling to it. To everyone who's listening, if you've made it this far into the episode, first of all, thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khair. We hope the discussions that we've had have been valuable, even though we don't necessarily want to say, oh, definitely listen to the opinions shared by our guests today. But if they do resonate with you, if they make sense, please do what you can to support those candidates that are good and supportive of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Palestine, and other areas of the Muslim world that are dealing with challenges. Even if you disagree with their points of view and you want to vote based on your own personal criteria, review the resources that have been shared. I'll go through them one more time before we end here, and go vote, right? The voting is probably at the end of the day the most important part, and then the next very important part is who you vote for. If we can vote collectively as a group and maximize our impact, that is the ultimate goal that we should all have. Just a quick checklist to help guide your vote in the days ahead. First of all, find out who your local candidates are. You can visit Elections Canada or check out 338canada.com to see the names and standings in your riding. You can also look for recommendations from Muslim organizations. So like the votepalestine.ca, muslimsvote.ca, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, CJPME. You can look at their recommendations. NCCM, Justice for All Canada, CanadianMuslimVote.ca is an excellent resource as well. You can also skim those party platforms that we mentioned. You don't necessarily need to read all 100 pages. You can just focus on 2 to 3 issues that matter most to you. It could be foreign policy and Islamophobia, but it could also be healthcare and housing, and taxes if you'd like. Learn something about the party leader. What do they stand for? What have they done in the past? What kind of tone do they set for the party? And this one probably is possibly the most valuable tool in our belts. Talk to someone you trust, discuss the options with a friend, a local community leader, or someone whose values you respect. That does not have to be a solo mission. But also, I want to say, try not to rely entirely on TikTok and Instagram for guidance. It is technically possible to find good guidance on social media platforms, but there are too many people offering too many opinions, and it's too much of a gamble to think you'll find the right voice. Ask yourself these 3 questions, in my opinion. Before you do vote, does this choice reflect my values? What impact will this have on the most vulnerable people in my community? Will I be okay explaining this vote to my kids one day? If this episode did help you, or helped you think differently, or helped you get a little unfrozen, please do share it with someone else who may need a nudge. And if you're still unsure, start small with one writing to research today, or ask one friend what they think. Inshallah, let's not waste this moment. Let's show up with sincerity, with strategy, and with care for each other. Allah, we thank you for allowing us to come together in this meaningful conversation. Forgive us for any shortcomings and accept from us the good that we have shared. Strengthen our faith and grant us the ability to act on what we have learned. Allah, accept this effort from us and make it a means of goodness. Keep us steadfast on the straight path and unite our hearts in love and understanding. Ameen. Until next time, thanks for listening. And you tell me, what kind of Canada are you voting for? Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.